You are listening to Season 5 of Future Ecologies.
Okay, here we go.
You know the drill.
Mendel,
Adam.
Future Ecologies.
And this is the last episode of our 5th season.
Thanks for coming with us.
And don't worry, we will be back soon. In the meantime, we're going to be keeping the podcast feed warm and cozy over the summer with a few extra treats for your ears. Today, we've got something really special because it's a story about plants.
It's more of a mystery about plants, because despite our budding interest, our story today reveals that many leaves remain unturned.
The story comes to us from journalist and friend of the show, Zoe Schlanger, the author of the newly released New York Times best-selling book, The Light Eaters: How the Unseen World of Plant Intelligence Offers a New Understanding of Life on Earth.
Zoe took one of our recorders to the jungles of Chile and back to report on what might just be the world's most ordinary, extraordinary plant. We'll let her take it from here. So, without further ado, this is Everything Will Be Vine.
Broadcasting from the unceded, shared, and asserted territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, this is Future Ecologies, exploring the shape of our world through ecology, design, and sound.
Journalists in my line of work tend to be focused on death, or the harbingers of it: disease, disaster, decline. That is how climate journalists mark time as the Earth passes benchmark after grim benchmark on its way into the foreseen crisis. There's only so much of this that one person can take. Or perhaps my tolerance was thin and easily worn out after years of focus on droughts and floods. In recent years, I'd begun to feel numb and empty. I needed some of the opposite. What, I wondered, is the opposite of death? Creation, perhaps. A sense of becomings instead of endings. Plants are that, given as they are to continuous growth. They'd soothed me all my life, long before studies came out confirming what we already knew. That time spent among plants can ease the mind better than a long sleep. Living in a dense city, I'd walked in the park under a canopy of yews and elms when I needed to clear my head. I'd spent long minutes gazing at the new leaves forming on my potted philodendrons when my nerves were fried. Plants are the very definition of creative becoming. They're in constant motion, albeit slow motion, probing the air and soil in a relentless quest for a livable future. A life spent constantly growing, yet rooted in a single spot, comes with tremendous challenges. To meet them, plants have come up with some of the most creative methods for survival of any living thing, us included. Many are so ingenious that they seem nearly impossible for an order of life we've mostly relegated to the margins of our own lives, the decoration that frames the theatrics of being an animal. Yet there they are all the same, those unbelievable abilities of plants, defying our anemic expectations. Through conversations with scientists around the world, I would learn that their way of life is so astonishing that no one really knows the limits of what a plant can do. In fact, it seemed that no one quite knows what a plant really is. This is, of course, a problem for the scientific field of botany. Or it's the most exciting thing to happen to it in a generation, depending on how comfortable you feel with seismic shifts and what you once thought to be true. As I looked deeper, I would find a scientific field eating itself alive with contradictions, points of contention multiplying as fast as the mysteries. But something in me was attracted to this lack of neat answers. who doesn't feel both drawn to and repulsed by the unknown? In the 19th century, naturalist Alexander von Humboldt wondered aloud why being outdoors evoked something existential and true. Nature everywhere speaks to man in a voice that is familiar to his soul, he wrote. Everything is interaction and reciprocal, and therefore nature gives the impression of the whole. Humboldt went on to introduce the European intellectual world to the concept of the planet as a living whole, with climatic systems and interlocking biological and geological patterns bound up as a net-like, intricate fabric. This was Western science's earliest glimmer of ecological thinking, where the natural world became a series of biotic communities, each acting upon the others. The question that I found mired in controversy was whether plants could be considered intelligent, and, for an even bolder minority, whether they could be considered conscious and communicative. For all their amazing adaptive behavior, were they sensate agents? Or were they simply acting out a predetermined genetic script? Although I had come to this corner of the scientific world at an exciting time, these questions were anything but new. At the turn of the 20th century, Jagadish Chandra Bose, a physicist turned biologist in Kolkata, India, had begun to experiment and measure the electrical responses of plants, and he became convinced that they shared a functional similarity to those in animal tissues.
1901, the Royal Institution, London. He gave a lecture demonstration of his latest experiment.
Touching the leaves of Mimosa pudica with a cotton soaked in ether, Bose demonstrates the fainting response in a plant. The Bose experiments were denied publication by the Royal Society. By daring to suggest that electrical responses are present in plants, he had offended the learned members.
Despite inventing instruments of unprecedented precision across several disciplines, Bose would be expunged from the scientific canon for his fringe beliefs, a fate not shared by Alexander Graham Bell, who was driven to invent the telephone in hopes of communicating with the dead, or Thomas Edison, whose experiments ranged into telekinesis and telepathy. Dark-skinned and Indian, however, Bose and his ideas were denied a place in Western textbooks for nearly a century. Popular books were a different story. In 1973, the publication of The Secret Life of Plants took the world by storm. 5 years later, a film by the same name, with a soundtrack by Stevie Wonder.
Plants have been wired into a complex computer. Their change of mood as they react to the crowds of visitors will be converted into musical expression.
I'll check that out there.
As the people move among the plants, the sounds they hear are the plants reacting to their presence. An ephemeral exchange of energy, linking two diverse life forms, becomes a symphony of emotions.
At the dawn of New Age culture, the world was ready to inhale ideas about how plants were just as alive as we are. It was an immediate and meteoric success, offering an Elysian new way to attend the living earth.
In some mysterious way, the plant which is attached to the instrument is able to feel the mutilation of its comrade.
The Secret Life of Plants was a glimpse at a society on the verge of direct communication with its leafy brethren. It would inspire thousands of hours of one-sided conversations and some very worn-out cassettes of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And it would turn out to be a beautiful collection of myths.
During intensive periods of meditation with plants, I learned to channel my energies and enter new states of being. After spending many hours in deep concentration, I am able to transcend my physical boundaries and allow my own spirit to commune with the spirit of my plant.
Many scientists would try and fail to reproduce the tantalizing research the book presented, eventually deemed fallacious and unprovable. According to botanists working at the time, the damage that Secret Life caused to the field cannot be overstated. The twin gatekeepers of science, funding boards and peer review boards, close the doors to any proposals with a whiff of plant behavior. Over the last 15 years, that tide has finally begun to turn, with a gentle swell in both research funding and academic publications. The march of technology, genetic sequencing and advanced microscopes, has made it possible to come to previously outlandish conclusions with real rigor. But still sensitive to the fallout from The Secret Life, and also due to the squishy, nebulous implications of the word, most scientific authors don't use terms like intelligence to describe what they find. Nonetheless, their results suggest that plants are much more sophisticated than anyone has dared to think. From the nerve-like action potentials first observed by Bose, to capabilities of memory, hearing, recognition of kin, and incredible interactions with insects, the papers probing remarkable plant behaviors are growing from a trickle to a fairly robust stream. One such paper caught my attention. It documented a vine doing something that should have been impossible, a magic trick that few animals have mastered and that no accepted plant mechanism could explain. So, in April 2022, I flew due south for 13 hours, first from New York City to Santiago, and from there to Puerto Montt. Then, after driving for another 2 hours past seemingly endless fields of potatoes bordered by rivers and lakes, I arrived into the Valdivian temperate rainforests of southern Chile. Not unlike parts of the Pacific Northwest, this climate was cool and misty, and every available space was absolutely brimming with plant life. The constant sights of green and sounds of rain blanketed my senses in a vibrant, static hum. In 2014, a Peruvian ecologist named Ernesto Giannoli had discovered that a vine, common to these rainforests, was able to mimic the shape of almost any plant it grew beside. A botanical chameleon. I'm not finding what I'm looking for. It seems like they may have cut them. I thought they were right here. Unfortunately, the sudden notoriety had made this little vine a target for poachers. It's appropriate, then, that it has a particular talent for camouflage.
But here, I found...
Oh, wow. It's
this
so
is
tiny.
Boquilla. Yeah, it's so tiny. This is Boquilla and this is Raphidamus. So that the first glance, you say, is the same. Quite difficult to tell who's who.
This is Ernesto Giannoli himself. And in his hands, Boquilla trifoliolata, a slender climbing vine with leaves in clusters of 3. Here, one strand of Boquilla was winding its way up a tree, Raphitemnus spinosus. On the part of the vine climbing the tree, its leaves had transformed. Now a dark, glossy green shrunk to a fraction of their original size and tapered to a point. And this was just one example of Boquilla's mimicry. Ernesto and his colleagues have found Boquilla modeling itself on more than 20 species, and counting.
So far, what we knew about mimicry was a one-to-one relationship. This species A mimics species B, but then comes along Boquilla and says, no, I can mimic very different species.
In the world of plants, mimicry is otherwise quite limited, shaped by special circumstances of co-evolution, like in the case of rye, which was once culled as an unwanted weed by early farmers. It was effectively selected to blend in so well with the fields of wheat it grew in that it became a cereal in its own right. Or certain types of mistletoe, which are each obliged to parasitize a particular host plant, tapping directly into its vascular system. The leaves of Australian she-oak mistletoe are strikingly similar to Australian she-oak. Likewise, the leaves of eucalyptus mistletoe resemble those of eucalyptus. Evolution has sculpted these plants to blend in with their specific surroundings, but on an animal timescale, their appearance is fixed. Not so with Boquilla.
the same individual can mimic two different species.
Bokeela's mimicry is spontaneous and flexible. A single vine may climb across several different plants and change its leaves accordingly.
I mean, in terms of size, 1:10 ratio, and in terms of shape and color, vein patterns, a broad array of traits. What is mimicry? Is similar colors, maybe similar shapes, but this goes beyond that.
What's more, direct contact is unnecessary for Bokeela to model itself after another plant. It may simply be growing nearby.
Whoa, that's huge.
Yeah, it's huge, and also this, as I told, this wavy.
The wavy edge.
Yeah, wavy edge.
Wow. That's unbelievable. I mean, that's like, what, 15, 16 times the size as the one over there?
Yes, exactly. Here's small Bokeelas, but starts growing larger and larger. Not all the plants, of course. Not all the leaves, of course.
So if you were an herbivore,
yeah,
your first impression would be...
That is another species.
Yeah. Wait, is this Bokeela?
Yes.
It's even got the yellowing.
And if we look carefully around, there are 5 more.
We are in a spot totally surrounded by Bokeela on all sides. It's sort of a glen of Bokeela. There's maybe 10 or 15 other species of plants, all growing up as thick bushes. And the Bokeela is twining around all of them. And on almost every single one I'm walking by, you have to look very closely, but the Bokeela has shifted its shape in some areas of its vines to match most of these species. In some places, the leaf is almost the size of my hand to match long, large leaves of one species, and 10 meters away, it's smaller than my pinky nail to match a species with very small, dark, glossy leaves that have a strong vein down the middle, and the Bokeela matches that vein and that gloss perfectly too. It's just astounding. And the longer I spend staring at an area, the more Bokeela appear, but it takes a while. So if I was an herbivore, I for sure would be tricked. If I was a deer walking through here, I just can't imagine, if they're visually guided, how they distinguish between these plants.
And not all of these model plants are endemic to this rainforest. Ernesto showed me it next to a plant, creeping buttercup, that had only recently been introduced, sometime in the last 20 years. Here, Bokeela's duplication was strikingly partial and imperfect. It almost felt like witnessing a young artist practicing their still life sketches, actively refining their skill in rendering the world. Every time Ernesto goes out into the field to study Bokeela, he and his colleagues discover it modeling itself on yet another species. I was present for the addition of 2 plants to this ever-growing list. First, a species of maidenhair fern, so far the only documented instance of Bokeela mimicking a fern, which I found myself. And second, an overstory tree known as notro.
This is the first record of Bokeela doing something with notro. This shape of elongated leaves is quite rare to observe in Bokeela.
Still riding high off my own small contribution, I asked Ernesto what it felt like to be the first one to notice Bokeela's magic trick.
What is the dream of a kid that likes science? To make a discovery, right? A dinosaur bone or whatever. This was close to that dream of the kid. But still, for it to be really fulfilled, I need to see the mechanism elucidated.
And in the hopes of elucidating the mysterious mechanism of Bokeela, 2 competing hypotheses have been proposed. Both of them revolutionary to plant science.
To crack the code of Bokeela immediately will lead us to crack a general code of plants. They go hand by hand. I mean, understanding Bokeela would imply understanding plants. That's my feeling.
The first proposal comes from František Beluska, founding member of the Society for Plant Neurobiology, which was later conservatively renamed the Society for Plant Signaling and Behavior. František is a controversial figure. Unlike most of his peers, he is a loud and proud champion of plant intelligence. In fact, he evangelizes the subjective consciousness of all cellular life. His hypothesis is as surprising as it is concise. He believes that plants can see.
Vision in plants is controversial, but it is strange that it is, because plants evolved from algae, and algae have vision. So if algae have vision, why should plants lose this very useful ability? So I'm surprised that people are surprised that the plant should see, because if the algae see, why not plants?
The suggestion that plants have a sense of sight goes back to 1905, when the German scientist Gottlieb Haberlandt described how structures on the surface of leaves could function as simple optics, affording plants thousands or even millions of tiny eyes.
Of course, the vision in plants is not like our humans' vision. They don't have an eye like we. They have cells on the epidermis. These cells will act as a lens and will transmit any object you will expose to these cells on the other side. This was experimentally shown but ignored.
Haberlandt's theory would go on to fascinate Charles Darwin's son, Francis, but ultimately it was forgotten. How could a plant, apparently without a nervous system or anything we recognize as a brain, resolve an image?
Everything is projected on the next layer, and how the cells in the next layer are processing the images and sending messages further in the plant, no one knows.
Since Haberlandt, plants have been revealed to have more kinds of photoreceptors on their surface than are found in the human eye. There should be no surprise that light matters to plants. Light is literally matter to plants. As any sighted person knows, the qualities of light convey a wealth of useful information. Still, it's a big claim to say that plants are not just weather stations, but telescopes.
Of course, this could be studied, but first, the science must acknowledge this ability, and then the agencies which give money for research should be willing to give money for such a research, but until now, nothing like happens. All what is done now is just our hobby.
František points to new research on several close evolutionary cousins of plants. A model cyanobacteria with an eye spot that can sense a light's direction and move towards it. A dinoflagellate that builds a structure that stunningly resembles a lens and retina. A chimeric assemblage of plastids and mitochondria, no less. And of course, he points to Bokila.
There is no way how we would explain this without some kind of vision.
So as outlandish as it may sound at first, a kind of plant vision is not entirely out of the question, and is one of the few explanations that has been offered to make sense of Bokila. But Ernesto is not convinced that vision is the mechanism behind this unassuming vine's abilities.
Plants don't need to see in order to do great things. How can texture, how can thickness be told from an image? And don't forget that there are some features that are hidden.
Case in point, the very first plant I saw Bokila copy with my own eyes. Raphitemnus spinosus. This tree's leaves curl over at the end, creating a spiny tip or spike. Likewise, in its mimicry, so does Bokila. But looking down from above, this distinguishing feature of Raphitemnus is simply not visible.
You have to feel. You have to put your finger on the underside of the leaf. How this is able to see the underside of a leaf when they are placed in particular direction that cannot make this possible.
Could it be that Bokila was truly covered in eye-like organs and was somehow able to integrate this information across different parts of its body, carefully observing the Raphitemnus from all angles? Or was it a hole in the plant vision theory?
I think this is too much of an anthropocentric view of the phenomenon.
As we strain to understand how Bokila can accomplish the seemingly impossible, itself just one example from a wave of newly discovered plant capabilities, the charge of anthropomorphism looms heavy in the minds of many scientists. The risk of discussing plant sensation, perception, or cognition is that such language is inescapably tied to our own sensation, perception, and cognition. That habituation with our animal faculties biases us to interpret plants on familiar human terms, rather than on their own.
Most people are not very happy with these words like pain, cognition, and intelligence, and vision, and hearing, so they think this is forbidden for plants somehow. When you do a science, you should start with the simple system and then to go to the more complex. And we would not have this problem with anthropomorphism if we would start our sciences with bacteria, then algae, protozoa, protists, and then some plants, lower plants, higher plants, animals, and then humans at the end. You all the time are blamed by some kind of anthropomorphism if you find something similar to humans, But of course, we are in evolution connected. And now every this term is loaded with the human abilities. So if you say sleep, pain, cognition, anything, they say you try to humanize plants, We try to convince them that we say plant cognition. It is not a human cognition. It is a plant-specific cognition.
Intelligence is a loaded word, perhaps overly connected to our ideas of academic achievement. It's been weaponized against fellow humans for millennia, used to divide people into hierarchies of worth and power. Yet it is, by its very definition, still a word that contains the germ of what we mean by alert, awake to the world, spontaneous, responsive, decision-making. From the Latin interlegere, to discern, to choose between. So do plants see? Or does an assumed primacy of vision render plants as lesser animals, diminishing these green bodies and leaving no room for the recognition that they may deploy means that far exceed the human?
It's very human in nature to try to put plants within the frameworks that we are comfortable to deal with. But, sorry, plants are different, so prepare. So prepare to be challenged, prepare to be proven wrong.
When we come back, Ernesto has his own theory to explain this remarkable plant plasticity.
Plastic plants?
Those two, after the break.
For all the times he has seen Botrytis trifoliolata, Ernesto had noticed something. Its mimicry is rarely total. Instead, it's patchy. Some Botrytis just look like Botrytis, even on a vine climbing a tree. This patchiness reminded him of the stochastic look of leaf spots and wilts and mottling. That is, it reminded him of the infection patterns of bacteria and viruses. Over the past few decades, another biological revolution has been unfolding. A new appreciation for the so-called microbiome, the communities of single-celled organisms living in and on everything else. Famously, in any given person, there are about as many non-human cells as there are human cells. No longer are microbes considered to be exclusively vectors of disease and decay, but are now also recognized as essential collaborators in digestion, mood, and ultimately, health. And humanity is not unique in this regard. Effectively, all animals, like termites, fundamentally rely on their microbiome. To most people, the essence of a termite is its ability to digest wood. Research has shown that this ability is conferred not by the genes of the termite, but by bacteria living within them. Correspondingly, those bacteria rely on other, smaller bacteria living within them. This is the dizzyingly nested perspective that pioneering evolutionary biologist Lynn Margulis first popularized as the holobiont. She defined the holobiont as a composite organism made of many organisms working in concert. It includes the microbiome, but also the macrobiome, the larger beings in which and upon the microbiomes live. Margulis proposed that complex multicellular life first came into being when microbes of different abilities teamed up, eventually fusing into one entity, most notably incorporating mitochondria and chloroplasts. She believed that these sorts of intercellular symbioses may have been more important to our evolutionary history than the slow, random mutation science believed to be the source of all evolutionary change.
Don't forget that once the mitochondria was a bacteria, it was a kind of a parasite that was welcomed by the cell saying, okay, you will make energy and I will give you a home. And that worked very well so far.
Although initially ignored and ridiculed, her theory of endosymbiosis is now widely accepted as fact. The completely self-contained individual is a myth that needs to be replaced with a more flexible description, Margulis wrote with her son Dorian Sagan. Each of us is a sort of loose committee. This state of nature is one of interpenetration and mingling that defies easy categorization. It occupies a middle space, both in the material reality of the world and in our understanding of it. To Bayo Akomolafe, a Yoruba poet and philosopher, this middle is not halfway between two poles. It is porousness that mocks the very idea of separation. He describes our collective biological reality as a state of brilliant betweenness that defeats everything, corrodes every boundary, spills through marked territory, and crosses out every confident line. What if, Ernesto wondered, this was the key to Bokila? What if its flexible appearance was an expression of a flexible holobiome? He conceived an experiment.
It is very important to understand the experimental design. There's this Bokila plant mimicking other plants. So we focus on one particular interaction, Bokila and this tree called Raphitamnus. So Bokila and the tree. We spotted this tree with Bokila growing onto it, and specifically we took leaves of Bokila doing the trick, leaves of Bokila resembling leaves of the tree, and, this is very important, other leaves from the same individual Bokila that were not mimicking the tree leaves. So we have this triplet: leaves of the tree, Bokila doing the trick, and Bokila being just the standard Bokila.
Each pair of Bokila leaves, both mimicking and non-mimicking, were picked from the same vine and were the same distance from the tree. They gathered these 3 sets of leaves from 5 sites and brought them all back to the lab.
We analyzed the communities of leaf endophytic bacteria.
Leaf endophytes are the microbiome of the leaf, the bacteria living within its tissues.
There's no one species of bacteria, there's hundreds.
Ernesto's hypothesis was that if the microbiome played some part in Bokila's abilities, then the community of bacteria in the mimic leaf should resemble that of the tree and differ significantly from the non-mimic.
And that's exactly what the results showed.
The leaves that successfully mimicked the Raphitamnus shared 255 distinct species of endophytes, more than triple those shared by the non-mimicking leaves.
I think this is a strong evidence of the involvement. I cannot say more than that. The involvement, somewhat, of bacteria in this phenomenon of leaf mimicry. One possibility, I think, is that in a way these microbes partially control, for instance, leaf shape. And this opens the avenue for research on this direction of genetic control, epigenetic control by bacteria, and so on.
Ernesto is hinting at something with profound implications. He suspects that bacteria and viruses exert influence on the shape of all plants, perhaps by ferrying genes and RNA directly, or perhaps by selectively activating or silencing pre-existing parts of the plant genome.
What literature tells us is that microbes are able to modify gene expression of other organisms. This can be airborne, like a bath of microbes, cloud of microbes, whatever you prefer.
The holobiome makes it difficult to delineate where one organism ends and another begins, metaphorically, but also very literally. What lives inside also often lives on and around. Each of us creatures, like Pigpen from the Peanuts, a blurry cloud of activity, a burst of flavor in the atmospheric soup.
And then we are forced to conceive that all plants are constantly exposed to this process.
But why then just Bokila? Why aren't all plants, or all animals too for that matter, integrating each other's features on contact? Well, we can't know for sure that they don't, at least on some subtle level. Bokila itself was described by Western botany in 1782, and it took us more than 200 years to even notice it could do this. Could there be other mimics all over the place, hiding in plain sight? Or is Bokila simply unique and particularly porous? Maybe most plants only speak in the holobiome code of their own species, while Bokila cracked some universal cipher, permitting its appearance to be overwritten by its neighbors for its own adaptive advantage. In the first paper ever published on Bokila's mimicry, Ernesto and his colleagues measured how copying the leaves of its surroundings correlated with less herbivory. From this view, Bokila's talents could be the undirected outcome of natural selection. Agency and intelligence not required. One experiment challenges Ernesto's microbial hypothesis. In 2021, a study was published claiming to demonstrate Bokila growing on and mimicking a plastic plant. Of course, such a synthetic model has no holobiome to offer, and the authors claimed it as a strong support for plant vision. However, this paper was met with criticism. Ernesto felt that the experimental controls were very weak, and he took issue with the analysis. The study itself was a collaboration between an unaffiliated independent researcher, an amateur scientist, along with a student of František Beluska. František himself is editor-in-chief of the journal in which the paper was published, drawing complaints of an undeclared conflict of interest. But all the negative attention hasn't discouraged František and his student, Felipe Yamashita, from looking further. František reports that they have yet unpublished data detailing how Bokila is capable of mimicking nothing more than a photograph of a leaf.
Yes, because we have now data that the Bokila is mimicking not only a plastic host plant, which is published, but we have now data that it is mimicking even pictures. So if you provide the Bokila with the pictures of leaves, different kinds of plants, then the Bokila starts within 2-3 days making some mimicking of these pictures.
Ironically, František and Ernesto have a very similar intuition about why the other's hypothesis is wrong. That is, the sheer breadth of Bokila's ability to emulate.
Because the Bokila is mimicking many physical parameters. It is mimicking the shapes, colors, texture, size, and so on. So it is not easy to transmit such information via some kind of bacteria. And even if there are some different bacteria on mimicking leaves, like on the non-mimicking, this is not any evidence that the bacteria are having something to do with the mimicking. For me, this theory is really not able to explain everything. I think it is only possible with some kind of division.
I would say very lightly, show me the pictures. Because there are no pictures in that paper. If Bokila is mimicking plastic plants, this is very easy. Take a picture and show it to us. as I done in every paper or article I have written, I'm a scientist. I want to understand. I don't want to be proven right. I don't want to be famous. I want to understand and hopefully be able to see the solution of this mystery within my lifetime.
One of the strangest things about Bokila isn't the plant itself. It's the near total lack of research attention. To the few scientists attempting to tease out its mysteries, even to Ernesto, it remains a side project. This may partly be lingering skepticism or trepidation from within the scientific community, but it's also partly practical. Bokila is just not easy to work with, compared to typical laboratory plants, so-called model organisms. So far, it's been pretty challenging to grow from cuttings in a greenhouse, although František says in his they're making good progress. Still, the patchiness of its mimicry challenges traditional statistical methods. For the time being, Ernesto and František may disagree on the most promising mechanism to explain Bokila, but they share at least one thing: an admiration for the 20th century philosopher Karl Popper. Popper is widely held to be a father of the modern scientific method and its premise of falsification. Briefly, he put forward the idea that scientific theories are never really proven to be true. They may only be falsified, or, in other words, disproven. According to Popper, science does not sit upon a bedrock foundation of truth. Instead, the great scaffolding of all scientific theory is supported only by pilings in swampy ground. To quote Popper, "The piles are driven down from above into the swamp, but not down into any natural or given base. And if we stop driving the piles deeper, it is not because we have reached firm ground. We simply stop when we are satisfied that the piles are firm enough to carry the structure, at least for the time being." So, we will always have more questions than answers. Are plants more akin to us than we have been prepared to admit? Or are they different in ways we will forever strain to imagine? Can we call them cunning in their own right? Or will such language always be too human? We share our planet with, and owe our lives to, a form of life at once alien and familiar. On what basis do we owe them our respect and appreciation? In the words of ethnobotanist Timothy Plowman, they can eat light. Isn't that enough? The more we learn about plants, the more their complexities seem to multiply. The swamp, it turns out, is full of life.
Zoe Schlanger is the author of The Light Eaters: How the Unseen World of Plant Intelligence Offers a New Understanding of Life on Earth.
And in which the story of Bokila is just one chapter. The Light Eaters is available now, wherever you get books.
This episode of Future Ecologies was produced by Mendel Skolsky and me, Adam Huggins.
With music by Modern Biology, Mort Garson, Hot Spring, Thumbug, and Sunfish Moon Light.
Cover art by Ale Silva.
And with special thanks to Fiona Glenn, Gianni Fontana, and Eden Zinchik.
Thanks also to our patrons. Future Ecologies is a sort of loose committee, a holobiome with each and every one of you. We would not exist without your continuous support, inoculating us against a hostile media economy, inspiring us with horizontally transferred memes, and most of all, helping us grow, slowly and steadily, upwards towards the light.
We're proud to be an independent podcast with no corporate sponsors and no ads. Just listener support, allowing us to make the show that we want to make. If you'd like to join the party, support the work that we do, and help make our 6th season the greatest yet, head to futureecologies.net/donate. join, and choose whichever option works best for you.
You'll get access to a bonus podcast feed where you can be the first to hear new episodes and exclusive bonus content.
Plus, our community Discord server, stickers, patches, and now, toques.
That's at futureecologies.net/join.
Or, just keep sharing the show with your community. It really helps. Okay. Thanks for everything.
You'll be hearing from us again soon.